right. Not that. This one? No. There. No. What is
It's
this?
first two. There you go. There you go.
All right. Easily confused. That's my story. So, first of all, I do want to really thank the department for the recognition that they're giving me and the opportunity to come here and speak. And yeah, so I'm trained as an agronomist and then crop ecology. So why are we having a seminar about profitable ranching? Because that's where the winding path of my life took me. I evolved beyond being an agronomist to being an animal scientist, both from a research standpoint and practical application. 21 years of that 23 that we're in Missouri, my wife and I and my kids, we had a 260 acre, I'll call it a grass farm. We raised, started out with sheep because we had a small property, and as the property grew, we expanded into cattle. I was doing grazing management and pasture improvement research at the Forage Systems Research Center, and pretty well all of it was harvesting with livestock. It was very livestock oriented. Then also I became an economist, number one, because we bought this farm in Missouri and had to pay for it. And in the 1980s and 90s, you could in fact buy a piece of property and pay for it with the ag production off of that land. You cannot do that hardly anywhere else in the United States these days. In 2003, at age 47, I quit the university. Now, I sometimes get introduced as a retired university professor. I was obviously way too young to have retired. I just needed to do something else in life, and that involved going into the private business. And it says I'm from Moore, Idaho. In my personal life, the move to Idaho was entirely recreational lifestyle. I did not go to Idaho expecting to be directly involved in ranch management or operations again, but I fell into a deal with a neighboring large ranch, and for 18 and a half years, I managed one unit of that ranch, 450 irrigated acres, about 800 acres of desert rangeland, 100 acres of flood ground, and typically 400 to 500 cow-calf pairs. I was fully immersed in ranching. So and I did that ranch management just in exchange for living on a piece of property. There was no salary, there were no, other financial arrangements there. But it was a great learning experience for me to learn grazing management on irrigated pasture, but also in the desert. I said it was a larger ranch. The ranch also ran on 160,000 acres of public land grazing. So the breadth of my exposure, I started doing small plot research and pasture improvement here with Dr. Doherty, and expanded to the point of, managing a pretty sizable ranching operation. But I made my real living for the last 20 years in consulting. I do workshops, conferences, speaking, but I do a lot of consulting work. And as part of that consulting work, I had to learn how to do proper accounting, how to do financial analysis, cost-benefit analysis, all these other things. So what started as just a little degree in agronomy has become a much, much larger involvement in the overall ranching world. Now, the topic of the seminar is 7 things I've learned about profitable ranching over the last 45 years. I used to have to include my 2 years of graduate work as part of that 45 years. And now I no longer have to do that. I left here in December of 1980 with my degree at that time. So this is a presentation that I give to producers all across the country. And I've given it in Australia. I've given it in South America because there's shocking similarities in what influences ranch profitability. So here we go. Number one, and the animal scientists hate this piece of it. Ranching is a land-based business. The livestock are only incidental. Ranching in the United States and a lot of other countries, but I'm going to talk specifically in the United States, is not a particularly profitable business on average. Now, what's interesting, if we look at cow-calf producers in the U.S., the top 15 to 20% make double-digit return on investment every year. The bottom 15 to 20% lose equity at a pace of 15 to 20% every year. The average of the industry is about a 1.5 annual return on investment. So it's not a very profitable business. And one of the things that kills profitability in ranching is the obsession with the animal. The obsession with individual animal performance limits ranch profitability because people who are obsessed with the animals don't realize this, that it's a land-based business. Two important concepts we talk about: carrying capacity, the number of animals we can carry while consistently making a profit and maintaining or improving the resource base. Carrying capacity is your measure of supply. Stocking rate is the number of animals we put out there to harvest that. That is our measure of demand. And most of you probably recognize that when demand exceeds supply, prices go up, which is good, but ecologically, bad things happen because we're putting more demand from livestock than what the land can support. Stocking rate is one of the primary determinants of profitability in the ranching business. So the number of animals you put out there, basically, the more animals, the greater the revenue stream is going to be. It is also a determinant of animal performance because as you put more and more animals on the land, they become competitive with one another and they can't selectively graze and eat a real high quality diet. So if we have demand exceeding carrying capacity, individual performance is definitely going to go down. And in the academic world, this is the general understanding of the relationship. As stocking rate increases, individual animal performance will decline, but that's after a point. Production per acre, however, will increase up to a point. This gets expressed in what are called the Mott curves. Those of you who are in forages probably know the name of Gerald Mott, famous American pasture scientist from the 1950s up to 1990-ish. And he drew this relationship out. We have increasing stocking rate. We have increasing performance. The red line is gain per head. And if we have, say, 40 acres, and we put one steer out there, that animal can selectively graze very high quality diet and it will do very, very well. We put 2 animals on 40 acres, both of them do great. And we can continue to add animals, but at some point, when feed becomes slightly limiting, their performance starts to fall off and eventually it'll crash. Now, as long as we can add an animal gaining at the same rate, we have a linear increase in gain per acre. But it'll start to slow down. Now, Mott said, this is the optimum stocking rate where those 2 lines cross. And obviously, you can draw the chart in different ways and they intersect at different points. But theoretically, he said, where they intersect is optimum stocking rate. The trouble, and our livestock industry, livestock academia has believed this for years and years and years. The problem is Mott was wrong. The economic optimum, so where profit can potentially be maximized, is just as the gain per acre is reaching its max, which says we can endure a really surprisingly high drop, or surprising low, however we want to say it, but we can endure a decline in individual animal performance and still increase profitability. And that is because this is a land management, resource-based business, and the livestock are incidental. This is one of the big things that I've learned. Ranchers and animal scientists in academia, their obsession with high individual performance is one of the things that has killed profitable ranching. And the reason why, as we increase individual performance, it always comes at a cost. Just about the only thing that is money for nothing is heterosis. We can get improved animal performance with genetic manipulation, with crossbreeding. But any other way that we strive to increase individual animal performance, it comes at a cost. So Kit Farrow is a seed stock livestock producer. And this is a very true statement. A herd of smaller cows will always produce more acres of calf per acre that are worth more per pound than what a larger herd of cows in the same acreage will do. This is a stocking rate response. As individual cows get bigger and bigger and bigger, a farm will support fewer and fewer and fewer of them. So you end up producing less total pounds of marketable animal. And for those of you who don't know, within the beef industry, the bigger an animal gets, it's worth less per pound. So smaller calves actually can bring as much per head as bigger ones do. All right. So this is why I say it's a land-based business. If we start looking at all the costs that are associated with land ownership, lease, property tax, seeding, fertilization, that's all stuff we do to the land. A typical commercial ranch in the United States has 3 to 5 times more dollars invested in land-based assets than livestock assets. If we think about profitability as return on investment or return on assets, you better be focusing on where are most of your assets invested. And it's in the land, not the livestock. That's why we need to get more out of every acre. Suddenly, ranching becomes an agronomic business because it's a land management business. It's how do we get more productivity out of every acre, not every cow. So Bert Teichert is he's retired now, he was vice president of operations for the Deseret Ranch System. If you don't know what Deseret is, it's all the ranches owned by the Mormon Church. When you put them together as an aggregate, it is millions of acres, millions of head of livestock. It is the largest ranching operation in the United States. It used to be a money-losing money pit for the Mormon Church. Bert Teichert and a few other individuals turned it into one of the most profitable ranching operations in the world. Bert knows something about profitable ranching. He has 7 keys to profitability. Carrying capacity, and he emphasizes return to the land, not return to the animal. Grazed feed versus fed feed, so stockpile versus hay. This is why I wrote Kick the Hay Habit, and I work hard to get producers to graze year-round rather than making and feeding hay, because grazed feed is much cheaper than stored feed. Cows per person or animal units per full-time employee. Gross margin, that's the difference between the value of your product and the variable cost of operation or production. Reducing overheads. On a ranch, we want no more than 33% of revenue spent on overheads. And then debt equity ratio. Now that's a very personal choice. Depends on your level of risk aversion. And then the seventh one was scale of operation. Yes, you can be more profitable with 800 cows than with 80 cows. But Burke says if you have those top 6 right, even a small cow herd can be profitable. What's very interesting to me on this, so this is the biggest ranching operation, the biggest beef cattle operations in the United States. Not one single key to profitability relates to individual animal performance. It's all land use efficiency, labor use efficiency, and capital efficiency. We just need to shut the animal science departments down and get them out of here because they ain't doing us any good. You can tell them I said that if you want to. Some of my best friends are animal scientists, what can I say? Like, as I said, none relate to individual animal performance. We don't need high production cows. What we need are functional cattle. And that list there just describes functional cattle. I won't bore you by going through it. Next important concept. You can never have too much grass or money, but you can have too many cattle. And this is the situation way too many ranchers find themselves in. So Bud Williams was a guy who teaches low stress livestock handling and then also livestock marketing classes. And Bud emphasized you have 3 inventories that you're managing. Available feed, never have too much of that. Capital, never too much of that. Easy to have too many livestock. Another thing Bud said, ranchers love cows, hate grass. They try to get all the cows the fences will hold and then get rid of every blade of grass inside the fence. And that's what they do. This is why you can never have too much grass. If you have excess available forage, you have opportunities. Buy more cattle. Bring in a sheep flock. Do this, do that. You can add enterprises, increase revenue flow. Overstocked ranch, where every day they're chasing a bite of grass, all you have there is challenges, no opportunities. Extra capital, buy more livestock, lease more land, buy in feed, go to Vegas. You got excess capital, you have opportunities. If you're broke, you got challenges. There's such a thing as being overstocked and going broke. This picture here, this was the ranch unit that I managed in the Pacimarai Valley in central Idaho. We were harvesting 240 to 300 animal unit days per acre. For those of you who don't understand animal unit days, standard animal unit's a 1,000-pound animal, eating 2.6% of its body weight, basically it's 26 pounds. So that's our productivity level here. This ranch is 5 miles down the road. Same environment, similar water rights, both sprinkler irrigated pastures. They're only harvesting 120 to 140 animal unit days. A lot of people think that your environment solely dictates what the what the productivity is going to be. The environment in which you live sets the upper limit of plant productivity, right? Amount of rainfall, temperature range, duration of the growing season, soil factors. Those are what limit the upper production potential. It is your management choices that dictate how much of that potential you actually harvest. Most pastures, and I have worked in 43 of the 50 states. Africa is the only continent that I haven't worked on. Oh, I haven't worked on Antarctica either. The penguins don't graze a lot. So the grazing management that we impose has a huge effect on the actual productivity of, or I should say the yield of that land. Most pastures in the United States and around the world are being managed at less than 50% of their productive capacity. That is the problem we have. We don't need to create new knowledge of how do we make the pasture more productive. We just need to implement what we have known, and in some cases, what we have known for hundreds of years. And we can radically change the efficiency at which we use our grazing lands. Do not calve in the winter months. Holy cow. This is the biggest single thing that most cow-calf producers could change to have a major effect on the bottom line of their business. The nutrient demand cycle. We're going to move right off of that. Beef cow has her, regardless of your environment. I got to turn off the sound on this thing. I do not know why it happens. Because I have the automation of the slides turned off. I have the sound turned off. And it's not my computer. I don't even know how to turn the volume off.
An animal scientist was let into the building, that's why.
Maybe. Oh, that looks like.
Yeah, John was on Zoom.
Oh, there, maybe. Hopefully that got it. We'll see. So anyway, females have a very predictable nutrient demand cycle, whether we're talking about cattle, beef cattle, dairy cattle, sheep, goats, bison. Females have very predictable nutrient cycle, and it is related to, that wasn't the volume. Yeah. Now they're making me mad. Regardless of. All right, let's do this one. So the gist of it is we have a cyclic nutrient demand. It isn't just flat linear. So in the blue bars, we have a cow calving in the wintertime, January 15th. This is the daily feed intake as a percent of body weight. And we're looking at 2-week increments going through the year. If we calve on January 15th, as the cow increases in milk production, the energy demand goes up, the protein demand goes up, the volume of feed demand goes up. And so we have this rising demand. Now, even in Kentucky, typically how much green growing feed do you have in January and February? Not very much. And so nutritionally, we have the cows having the highest demand at a time when what we typically have to feed is high-cost hay rather than low-cost pasture. After peak lactation, it starts to go down. Now, you might not be able to see the line. This is 3% body weight intake. You will notice that these bars here are above 3%. The next cow we have doesn't calve until May 15th. So her peak demand comes in the summer months when we have lower cost feed. That is above 3% because of the winter cold factor. The animals have to eat even more just to keep the body warm in the wintertime. So we have peak occurring when we don't have low cost feed, and it is a higher peak. This particular cow example here is a 1,200-pound cow of low to moderate milking ability. The difference between the total feed consumption of the year for that cow is about 750 pounds of feed, which isn't huge, but it's an amount. As we make the cow larger or genetically improve her milk production potential, because animal scientists are obsessed with individual animal performance, we can see that difference become a ton. 2 years ago, you could not buy a ton of hay in Idaho for under $200 a ton. That $200 is very often the difference between making money and losing money. So this is a big economic factor. The feed demand is high here and it costs too much. We don't have as high a peak and it's even lower cost feed. So that's why we don't want to calve in the wintertime. It's important that we have calves born on green grass. I apologize for this. Yeah. I'll just take a break from talking. Okay. I think that's the only segment in here that it'll try to do that. But if you killed it, thank you. All right. It's just the power of an administrator. She walks up there and magic happens. All right. Here's one that just will shock you. Water makes grass grow. There's a table here. Too much to look at. But what it basically says, as we increase the amount of water in the environment, the total yield goes up. But the real key thing is the yield, the acre inch dry matter yield for every inch of water increases as total water increases. Now, don't think about this just as how much rain is falling outside. Think about it as water that effectively gets into the soil profile. So as we can store more water in the soil profile, our yield per inch of water goes up. And that gives us a total increasing yield, but it only goes up to a point. Then it'll fall off. So the idea that water makes grass grow is key. Now, what in terms of management, grazing management, what can we do to affect stored water? So we have evapotranspiration, the combined transpiration use of water for plant metabolism, evaporation, the direct loss of water from the soil surface. If we have the landscape covered in green living plants, the majority of water use is transpiration. To put this in real simple terms, transpiration grows cow feed. We have minimal water being evaporated from the soil surface because we're keeping it covered from direct sunlight and keeping the soil cooler. So we have minimal evaporation. Evaporation does not grow cow feed. So we want to keep this arrow big, keep that one small. When we allow the land to dry out by grazing it too short or having plant species that are not adapted to that environment, which in some of our seeding mistakes is the result, what we do is we flop this out to where most water is being evaporated, not growing cow food, minimal water left to support transpiration, growing of cow food. So we want to keep the ground green and covered, keep it hydrated. Here's where it says, carrying capacity determined by environment and management. Upper limit of productivity is the environment. Your management determines what happens here. So in theory, these two locations should be producing the same amount of feed. If it was only tied to amount of water, soil type, length of growing season. We are very, very different from what they are. This is time-based management. This is spatial-based management. And you might say, what does that mean? We'll see in a minute. As we increase net photosynthesis per acre by how we manage the plant canopy, we can build additional organic matter in the soil. A 1% increase in the surface foot of soil will increase the water holding capacity by an acre inch of water. that is profound and that is substantial. So that's one of the key things that we are looking at is increasing infiltration rate into the soil and storage capacity of water into the soil through our everyday choices in grazing management. How do you do that? Maintain vegetative cover, appropriate litter layer on the soil surface. We do that by balancing use and recovery. In set stocking, or as farmers would typically call it, continuous grazing, it's a very negative impact on the water cycle and water use efficiency. As we balance use and recovery, keep the ground covered, let it regrow, graze down to appropriate residual, just keep the plant community in this range here. We have a much more functional water cycle. We're building organic matter. We try to avoid animal concentration points and animal compaction. So managing the water cycle is a key part of grazing management and improving carrying capacity. And now we come to time manages more than space. There's a very simple explanation for why that is the case, which, by the way, this is we moved a year ago, so this is no longer my front porch view, but for 18 and a half years, that was my front porch view right there. That's high stock density grazing on a center pivot pasture. So we talk about the grazing cycle, and the grazing cycle is made up of 2 time periods. When the animals are actually in the pasture grazing, that's the grazing period. When we remove the animals and allow the plant community to regrow, that's the recovery period. And these next 2 slides are the simplest explanation of why time-controlled grazing is so important rather than simple spatial management. During the grazing period, mostly negative things are happening to the plants in the soil. Because animals like to eat leaves, they start biting off the leaves, photosynthesis is going to be diminished. Because the top part of the plant is tied to the bottom part of the plant, if we diminish photosynthesis on the top of the plant, we are going to reduce energy flow to the root system, causing it to contract. Now, the new science of the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years in soil biology tells us that there are way more symbiotic relationships taking place in the soil besides just nitrogen fixation between rhizobium and legume plants. There's a whole network of checks and balances against pathogenic bacteria, fungi, insects in the soil. So if we have functional biology, we have less negative things happening to the plant. I don't know if the slide is still in here, but work from Australia and now in the US has been repeated. Anywhere from 30 to 60% of the photosynthesis, sugars created in photosynthesis today, within 48 hours are transferred through the root system and exudates to soil microbial populations to support those symbiotic relationships. Nutrient uptake of the plants through mycelium and mycorrhizal fungi, important part of it. When we stop photosynthesis, we stop that direct energy flow to soil microbes. If we are going to have compaction occur in a pasture, it is going to occur while the animals are there. So those are negative things that are happening during the grazing period. The only positive thing is excretion. This is our fertilizer program. The dung and urine bringing nutrients back to the soil surface. Now, the shorter the grazing period, the fewer days of the year do we spend having these negative things happening, and the sooner we can get to recovery. Why is it important to get to recovery? Because mostly positive things are happening. Leaves start growing, so photosynthesis takes off. As we increase photosynthesis, the root system starts expanding again. We resume direct energy flow to soil microbes, nutrients being released from feces. So during the recovery periods, positive things are happening. Now, recovery, if you go from a calendar day basis and say, oh, you have to have 60 days of recovery, most of the year, or at some time of the year that's going to be too little. Sometime of the year it's going to be too much. There might be one time of the year where 60 days was the right choice. So we need to adjust the length of the recovery period based on the prevailing growing conditions. All right, so recovery. What we have here is the number of subdivisions within the pasture. If we have one pasture, we have no days of recovery. As we increase the number of subdivisions, so we're creating not just smaller spaces, we are creating smaller increments of time going across here. We see that with the pasture split into 10 pieces, we accomplish 90% of the recovery benefit. So some people say, why would you ever make more than 10 paddocks then? Because there's a whole lot of things ecologically that are happening besides just recovery. And so these are things that shorter grazing periods provide to the pasture, and all of these increase the effectiveness at which we harvest more and more feed out of that carrying capacity bank that we have. And so if we do all these things and it leads to increased carrying capacity, that also increases our revenue flow. There are two terms that get used in grazing: overstocking, overgrazing. Some people use them interchangeably. They're two very different things. Overstocking is when stocking rate exceeds carrying capacity. It's more demand than we have supply. That is a ranch-wide problem, and there's only one way you heal overstocking, and that's you reduce animal numbers. Overgrazing is allowing plants to be bitten when they're in a negative carbohydrate balance. What does that mean? I'll start with a positive carbohydrate balance. Positive carbohydrate balance means you have enough leaf area for active photosynthesis to support both new growth in the plant and sending storage carbohydrates to the storage organs. That's a positive carbohydrate balance. There's more energy flow downward in the plant than there is upward. A negative carbohydrate balance, we have energy being pulled from storage organs to support new growth. So there's more energy flow upward in the plant than there is downward. Overgrazing happens in a negative carbohydrate balance, and we have two ways that happens. One is, what's the next picture? Okay. One way is animals stay too long on a pasture. Set stocking. That's the chronic problem we get with set stocking, is the animals are repeatedly pushing the plants deeper into a negative carbohydrate balance. The other one is maybe we remove the animals, we allow them to come back, but we didn't allow the plant enough time to fully recover. So that's how overgrazing takes place. These are both failures of time management. And so if we have overgrazing taking place on our farms or ranches, it is a failure in time management, not that we have too many or too little animals. It's a failure to effectively manage time. To me, this is the most important part of grazing management. It's time management. And we teach, multi-day courses on this. This is just an illustration of what you can do with time management. A lot of you are familiar with a plant called broom sedge, Andropogon virginicus, I believe it is. It's a native warm season grass, and the general perception is that it's inedible. It has no quality, it has no value, animals will never eat it. Well, the basic problem it has when you get to winter is it has 2 to 3% crude protein in it. And so there's not enough protein to allow the fiber to be digested, so animals don't eat it. Well, if you just turn animals out in a big field, they're going to selectively graze out every bite of fescue, white clover, bluegrass that's there, and leave you the dead standing broom sedge. This is time-controlled management on broom sedge. This was a place one of our sons was running down in South Missouri. Yesterday morning, that field there, that paddock there, looked just like this one here. 600 cows on 8 acres for 24 hours. They ate a mixture of stockpiled fescue, other cool season stuff in there. And because of the high protein content of that, they completely utilized the inedible, unpalatable, unusable broom sticks. Spatial management will never accomplish that. Time management, you can see the cows are back there now. And at the end of today, that field back there will look like this. They'll come there tomorrow. And so it takes a waste plant and turns it into usable feed. Time management. Focus on what you can control. This is, when I'm talking to producers, this is the point I make. There's only 4 necessary ingredients for making meat, milk, and fiber. Those are carbon dioxide, solar energy, water, and soil minerals. That is all it takes to be in the cattle or sheep production business. Well, what about some labor? You probably have some land on which to capture the solar energy and carbon and all that. Yeah. But if you build your business around understanding this, rather than just buying inputs, it's real easy to have a profitable business. So we talk about managing ecosystem processes. And those are solar energy flow, the water cycle, mineral cycles, and biodiversity. If you build your livestock operation around managing these, it's hard to not have a profitable business. We need animals to harvest that feed, to be the factory to give us a saleable product. And this is the way that I look at livestock on the farm. The cow is not the queen of the farm. She is simply a ranch employee. Every animal out there is a ranch employee. And as employees, they have jobs to do. And I'm going to list out the jobs of the cow. Rustle her own grub. Find the best bite of feed she can. Deliver a live calf every 12 months. Bring a live calf to the weaning pen. Stay healthy without a lot of fuss. Mow weeds, fertilize pastures, plant seeds, till grounds. Almost every task that my neighbor sets out to do with a tractor and a piece of equipment, I can accomplish with a cow. If I know how to make her work for her living. And then a really important one is come to work with a positive attitude every day. Those are the jobs of the livestock. A manager should never step in front of an employee and do their job for them. What a manager does is create a working environment where your employees can thrive. So we want to set up our farms and ranches in such a way that that cow or you or nanny, whatever species we're talking about, that they can effectively do their job and we do not get in their way and do that job for them. Maintain ranch infrastructure, because I've never seen a cow knock down a gate and put it back up. Market ranch products. Plan, monitor, adapt, replan. These are the things the manager does, but most of our neighbors are gathering feed for the cows, or bringing them some kind of supplement because a nutritionist told them that, well, they need to have this. They're out there babysitting, living with their cows night and day in the winter months to pull calves out, to get them up to where they can nurse and all those things, nurse mating cows. Those are not jobs that people should be doing. This is why I emphasize we need functional livestock, animals who know how to do their jobs. This is just an economic contrast I want to run through quickly. Most cow-calf producers, and I'm going to say around Kentucky here, operate like they're still in the 1970s. Well, that's the way we've always done it here. That might work out in Missouri, but that won't work here. And in Missouri, they say, well, that might work in Kentucky, but it's not going to work here. We all have this attitude that because we've always done it this way, it's the only way it can be done. this is an economic contrast. So in 1973, to pay a cowboy, 21 calves. To buy a 3/4 ton four-wheel drive pickup, 20 calves. Total annual cost to pay and equip a cowboy, 52 calves. All right, now, most of you might not know it because you're not in the animal sector. We have the highest beef prices that there have ever been in the United States in nominal dollars. Fed cattle, so this would be cattle ready to go to the packing plant. Right now, we're selling for $210 to $215 a hundredweight. In 1973, we're also at the peak of the cattle cycle, and it was the highest price we'd ever had, and it was $54 a hundredweight. Well, 212 sounds like a whole lot more than 54, doesn't it? In consumer price index or inflation adjusted dollars, cattle today are worth 55% of what they were in 1973. It makes it tough to be profitable. In 2023, 49 calves to pay the cowboy's wage, 71 calves to buy the pickup. Total number of calves just to pay and equip that cowboy, 138 calves. We can't operate the same way we did in 1973. Just the economic times have completely changed. It doesn't work. Yeah, we're going to skip that. We're going to skip that. This slide here, and by the way, it's my understanding that this is being recorded and this is all going to be available through the department if you want to look at these things closer. But this just illustrates why feeding a cow for a day, grazing, is typically going to be substantially lower cost than what it does to feed her hay or silage. Well, I should have actually had that slide I said I'd skip. It was about reducing gross margin, reducing overhead, and accelerating turnover. But anyway, if you are a livestock operation, the only thing you basically have that's going to pay for that equipment is livestock product. And how does that hay baler increase the amount of livestock product you have to sell? Typically, it doesn't. It only adds to the cost of producing that livestock. So we got to get away from equipment and all that. This one couldn't work Kentucky into here because it starts with a K, not an M. But based on actual producer records, this shows how messed up our cow-calf operations in this country are. Minnesota, Missouri, Mississippi, they all feed the same amount of hay. Why on earth would that be? You know, Minnesota, for all practical purposes, could be Canada. Mississippi's down there on the Gulf Coast. Missouri is the Garden of Eden of grazing. How is it possible that everybody feeds the same amount of hay? And basically, we feed hay to the extent that we can make hay. Everybody's got their big round baler. Everybody's got a hay mower. They just go out and make hay because that's the way we've always done it here. You know, 70 years ago, that wasn't the way it was done. 50 years ago, it was. But as we made hay, making hay easier and easier task, everybody made more hay. Well, if we got it, let's feed it. And so there they went. And then the last concept here is I will have no fear of wasting grass. A lot of people who do rotational grazing, they go out to the pasture, they think they're going to move the cattle, they look and say, wow, there's a lot of grass there. I don't want to waste that. And so they leave them here another day rather than moving them over here. I'm going to show you the impact of staying that extra day. So this is what we would call a phase 2 residual. It's 4 to 5 inches of stubble. There's a lot of green leaf area to keep photosynthesis going. The soil is mostly covered up. The upper part of the plant is much more nutritious than the lower part of the plant. So if we graze like this, leaving that taller residual, good for the plants, good for the soil, good for the livestock. Now we go out there, we see that, we say, well, I don't want to waste that grass. I'm going to leave them here another day. We leave them here another day, and it gets grazed down to this point. Very little leaf area remaining, and recovery coming from stored carbohydrates and storage organs is always a slower rate. than what it is from active photosynthesis. We have more sunlight directly hitting the soil. We have asked the livestock to eat deeper into the low quality part of the plant. That's bad for the plants, bad for the soil, bad for the livestock. That's what most of our neighbors do. You'll notice I never say anything bad about somebody in the room, I only reference the neighbors. All right. Too many of you people aren't rural because you don't understand about talking about the neighbors. All right. So this is what it translates into productivity. Those two previous pictures, one where we left the grass 4 to 5 inches tall, one where we took it down to 1 to 3 inches in a 200-day growing season. And this is work we did in Missouri, where we're looking at the post-grazing residual height. That's in inches. Here's the daily pasture growth rate. If we graze it down to 2 inches, the recovery rate's about 33, 34 pounds per acre per day. And if you take that into 2,000, so we're looking at the time to grow a ton of feed, 64 days to grow a ton of feed. 200-day growing season, we can grow 3.1 tons per acre. If we leave it at 4 inches or a little higher, our growth rate at 50, 40 days to grow a ton of feed, 5 tons per acre yield. That's 60% increase in yield by leaving 2 more inches of grass. That's how we change the world. That's how we put carbon back into the soil. That's how we mitigate climate change. Is you just got to be willing to waste more grass. Because if you waste more grass, you will grow more grass. So there's 3 mantras of grazing that we use. It takes grass to grow grass. Grass feeds the grass. Grass feeds the soil. Then grass can feed the livestock. Again, ranching is a land-based business. We need to put our focus on plants and soils. And if we do that, the animals come along for the ride. And then lastly, I will have no fear of wasting grass. And because I generally give this talk to producers, we end that with a book ad. So those are the 4 books that I have written, and I peddle them because I don't get a regular paycheck at the end of every month, whether I do anything or not. I have to hustle for a living. There is my contact information if anybody wants to do it. And hopefully we got a few minutes left for a question. 5 minutes. I got a little carried away, but not too bad. Yes, sir, in the back.
Thanks so much for the presentation. Have you thought about being a professor and at the same time being a rancher?
Have I thought about being, okay,
At the same time?
for 22 years in Missouri, that's what I did. We had our ranching operation there, and I was not an on-campus professor. I was a researcher at an outlying station, like Princeton, Quicksand, something like that. So yeah, I did it simultaneously for 20-some years. And that's where most of my credibility with the farming and ranching community comes from. We did the research. I mean, I can show you, this is what happens to the yield when you leave that extra 2 inches. And I did that on a daily basis in real life on a real ranch. And so it made it believable for people. Now, if memory serves me correctly, Dr. Ray Smith here has a beautiful illustration, a video or time-lapse photography of orchard grass recovery based on post-grazing residual. It is a great illustration, shows the principle very well. I don't know how widely accepted, or how much exposure that powerful video clip has to farmers and ranchers. But that's purely academic, but it's a perfect illustration. Did it get shown to enough producers? Does it help change the world? I don't know. I hope it does, but having an I wore my travel shoes. I don't have any bovine fecal matter on these shoes here. But I was introduced once early in my career, who said the the host of the meeting asked me to put my foot up on the table, and well, I did that. And I had just come, I'd left my university job, went home, done chores, gone to do this meeting, and the guy said, "You see that? The shit on his boot is the same color as what's on yours." And that's how I built my credibility in the industry. Good research, but daily application. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, different question, but when it comes to fertilizer application as a rancher, how do you decide like how much you apply and where?
A fertilizer?
Right.
Basically, we use no fertilizer other than effectively recycling the dung and urine. Now, if you are starting from bare degraded farmland, yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a soil test. We're going to look to see what's there and make soil amendments as needed. Now, I prefer poultry litter, compost, unrolling hay and feeding. I prefer those avenues of delivering nutrients to the soil more than synthetic fertilizer, because if I just go with an NPK mix, that's what I'm getting. If I'm putting plant material, fecal material back on it, I'm getting a broader package of micronutrients, calcium, magnesium, other stuff coming in, plus the organic matter from that manure, compost, or hay feeding, and that's beneficial. So yeah, we make the soil amendments, but we do prefer to use plant-based materials to get there. One last question, and we're going to have to terminate this. If not, we'll just terminate it now. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Oh,
Jason gave us a great presentation. Jimmy gave a good introduction, but it would be hard to describe the number of individuals that have been affected by Jim's knowledge and speaking and things like starting grazing schools that we do in Kentucky that are done in many states, and the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people that have come through those grazing schools, and then have helped their neighbors apply that kind of stuff. So I don't know telling how many hundreds of thousands of people on the land raising cattle, raising livestock, raising sheep across the country and even across the world have been affected by one of our own graduates, Jim Gerrish. And so I want to present him this award and thank him for coming. Thank him for all of his contributions.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.